tax day. They had marches all over America demanding the president's taxes. They wanted to see his income tax report. What's going on in America where, you know, all these people gather all at the same time in the same place? How can they all gather together? How can they all, every city, they're marching, they're all doing this. Who's setting this up? And yet the reporters all believe it. They're feeding us a line. America's unrestful. They're waiting to be. They just can't wait to get the president's tax return, and they're revolting because of it.
To answer your question very briefly, I'd say this: is we lay out, as we do when we brief and teach and train law enforcement or leaders, the jihadi movement, the terrorist movement in the United States, is working directly in conjunction with the hard left Marxist movement. So whether we're talking about any of the Soros-funded groups, including Black Lives Matter, at the ground level, at the state level, at the national level, and at the international level, they are working together. And there are a lot of common threads that tie them together. And to kind of punctuate that, I'll just say this. During the 1980s, 100% of the anti-nuclear protests in Europe and the United States were funded by the Soviet Union. 1,000 or 5,000 or 10,000 people don't randomly just pop up with pre-printed signs and a complete logistical plan out of nowhere. You're correct about that. This is all, when you see these things, whether it's in Ferguson or Baltimore or New York or wherever, they are planned and they are funded by enemies of the United States.
Yeah.
Joel, have you studied any of that yourself?
Wow.
You know, it's when I look at these sort of things, I look at the rage. There's a spirit of rage that has just swept the nation. I look at the riots in Berkeley. They're burning things, and you know, Ferguson and this sort of thing. I go, okay, what's behind this? What's the spiritual issue? Because now look, Black Lives Matters. There's a very sacred issue there that much of the black community feels, and that's legitimate. But then Satan comes along and he subverts it, and he gets these folks that they preempt it. What I think is happening is sort of a prelude. What I see all of this rage, I see Psalm 2. Why do the Gentiles gather? Why do they conspire? Why do they plot a vain thing? And it's not against Donald Trump. Now, on the outside, in the natural, we hate Donald Trump, we're furious about this, we're furious about that. But the scriptures say they gather and they plot, ultimately, against the Lord and against his anointed. And there's a lack of logic. There's a rage that comes over. And, you know, they're protesting what? They don't like that Donald Trump is a warmonger, and therefore they're going to break and destroy. You know, there's a fundamental cognitive dissonance. There's a detach, and so we need to recognize the spirit that's behind it. In my opinion, when you see the rage of Satan directed against something, that's usually evidence that God is involved, because Satan is enraged in that which God is doing in the earth.
Yeah.
And yes, there's a lot of rage at Donald Trump, and I'll be honest, I wrestled through a lot of issues during the early part of the campaign, but I've become solidly convinced in my spirit that the Lord is using this administration. He's doing something quite powerful, and it's for that reason that the rage of Satan, this irrational rage of Satan, is so directed toward this man.